Today I'm going to show you how to do front brakes the Craig way, the basic way. And the first thing you got to do is when the vehicle's on the ground is to remove the hubcap. And the next thing you got to do is loosen the lug nuts. You just crack them open. You don't take them totally off, otherwise you'll end up with a big mess. And when the vehicle lug nuts are loosened, the next thing you got to do is support the vehicle securely on a jack stand, or in this case a 3-ton hydraulic jack. And you jack up the vehicle and you get it in the air. And when the vehicle's in the air, the next thing you got to do is totally remove the lug nuts off the vehicle and then remove your tire. And when the vehicle's in the air after removing the tire, the first basic thing you got to do with front brakes is to push the caliper piston back in its bore. Here's the caliper, and here's the piston right in back of the caliper. You got to push it back in its bore. You got to place a C-clamp across the caliper like this, and that pushes your caliper piston back in its bore. And I'll demonstrate that. And you take the C-clamp and you place it across here, and you tighten up the screw on the C-clamp until it gets so tight, then stop. You don't want to over tighten it, otherwise you'll end up breaking your C-clamp or possibly breaking your caliper piston, and that's no fun. And to tighten up the screw on the C-clamp, I usually use this piece of conduit placed over the handle, and that gives me more leverage. But when it gets tight enough, stop. Otherwise you don't want to tighten it too much. And you take the C-clamp off, and the next thing you got to do is to loosen these mounting sleeves. With these mounting sleeves, there's one right here, and there's one right on the bottom too, and they're held together, yeah, and they're held on by these like Allen wrench heads. And you take the Allen wrench and you place it over. I'll put it on for a demonstration here. You take the Allen wrench and you loosen up those sleeves like this. And I usually use this regular Allen wrench with this piece of conduit. And I place the Allen wrench in this piece of conduit, and I got a wrench. And some people don't like my method, but it's my method, not theirs. I mean, they got other methods, other methods. And yeah, I've used several Allen wrench head sockets in the past, and it just trashes them. And I like my method better, and besides it's cheaper in the long run. And yeah, I just take this Allen wrench inside the metal piece of conduit pipe, and I just loosen up the mounting sleeves. Loosen up the bottom one, and I loosen up the top one. And the next thing you got to do when you got those totally loosened is to lift the caliper off like this. And some people like to hang the caliper by a piece of wire. I just hang it by the control arm. And you remove the pads. You remove that pad, and you remove that pad. Okay. And the next thing you got to do is to finish pushing the piston back in its bore. Here's the caliper piston. And you got to finish pushing the caliper piston back in its bore. You take the pad that was on the back of the piston and you place it back on, and you take your C-clamp and you just finish it off. And I'll tighten it up. It's kind of hard to hold the camera. Yeah, you take the C-clamp and you finish pushing the caliper piston back in its bore, and you then remove the C-clamp and make sure the caliper piston is flush with the mounting surface of the caliper, and that way you make room for your new pads. The new pads, of course, are thicker than the old ones. The old ones are wore out, and you gotta push the piston back in its bore enough to make room for the new pads. I mean, if you got too narrow of a gap, in between the pads, it's kind of hard to slip over the rotor here. So yeah, I mean, you gotta push the piston back of this bore enough to make room for the new pads. Otherwise, if you try to place the pads on the rotor with too small of a gap, I mean, it's no fun. Tell me about it. I've been there. And the next thing you got to do when the old pads are off is to take the sleeves totally out of the caliper. Here's the caliper mounting sleeves, and they're in there pretty tight usually on this one. I usually take a screwdriver and a hammer, and I just tap them out, and they slide out the back. So I remove those totally out, and then I take some marine waterproof grease and I put it inside the boots. I lube them up pretty good, and then I take some marine waterproof grease and grease the sleeve of the mounting sleeve. I just grease it and I shove it back in the hole like this, and then I push it totally back in its hole until the top head is just sticking out. And the next step to do is to install your new pads. And you install your new pads. I'll just use the old ones as a demonstration. Stick this pad right there, and stick this pad right there, and you just place it back on the caliper mounting flange like that, and you tighten up your sleeves. I usually tighten up the sleeves with a piece of conduit and the Allen wrench head. I usually just tighten them up like this with more leverage, and then you're done. And that concludes this video, and have a good night, everybody. Bye.